If you're new to our channel, we'd love to have you join our little community. Just hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications. We promise it will be worth your while. Valentina Valente stared at her son's final report card. George had just graduated high school with marks that filled her with disappointment. George had always been lazy when it came to schoolwork. He received EC throughout his academic career despite being sent to the best private schools that money could get him into. Valentina frequently scolded her underachieving son and tried to punish him. However, all of her efforts to get him to work harder always resulted in failure. Given his grades, George could only get into a community college. When Valentina brought the idea of going to a community college, George rejected the idea. Instead, he told her that he wanted to join the family business that she ran. Valentina put her head down when she heard her son's words. She had inherited the business from her father after his death and the untimely death of her brother. The business was going strong, but she had not started with it. She went to college after high school and began working in a different industry before she began working for the family business. After her father began to slow down, George had always intended to follow his mother into the family business. That was the main reason. He saw no need to put any effort into his schoolwork. George figured that his future was set. Valentina walked away from her son and retreated to her bedroom. Over the following days, she thought a great deal about her son's choices. She did not want to reward him for taking the easy way out. She wanted him to understand that he would have to overcome adversity at some point, and that someone was not always going to be around to bail him out. Valentina had always tried to set a good example for her son. She figured that she had to, because she did not want George to turn out like his father. George's father, Marshall Shrimpton, was the ne'er-do-well son of a local dynasty. The Shrim family's wealth stretched back over 200 years. Marshall was never trusted with any of the family's holdings. However, as the family knew his shortcoming too well, Marshall was instead pushed into politics, serving in several governors' administrations, because he was simply not trustworthy enough to be given any responsibility for the family companies. His family's opinion of him was only further confirmed when he impregnated Valentina before marriage. Marshall's family disapproved of the relationship between the two of them. Some disapproved of Valentina because of her last name alone, while others in his family simply did not like the fact that her family's wealth was lower than Marshall's and that Valentina was more independently successful than Marshall could ever be. Still, they pressured Marshall to marry Valentina for appearances. Valentina was happy to marry him at the time, as Marshall was charming and possessed more talents than his family gave him credit for. However, not long after they married, Valentina realized that Marshall was simply unwilling to do the work required to make use of his skills. After George's second birthday, Valentina and Marshall divorced. George's relationship with Marshall was distant. After that, Marshall was frequently away on trips and rarely saw his son until his death a few years later in a plane crash. Valentina saw a lot of Marshall in her son. George had his father's sense of entitlement and slothful work ethic. These traits seemed as inherited to Valentina as George's slight build and delicate features. Valentina wanted to make sure that her son turned out to be nothing like his father. Valentina decided to give her son an ultimatum that she knew could only end one of two ways. Either George would go along with her plans, or he would run away from home. The latter seemed unthinkable to her, given the fact that she had coddled him so much that she was sure he could not live on his own for long. George came home after hanging out with a group of his friends and found his mother waiting for him in the kitchen. Valentina smiled at her son and said, "How was your day, George?" "Good, Mom." "Yours?" George replied as he took hold of a glass from the cupboard. "I've been thinking about your request to come to work for me," Valentina said. George looked at Valentina strangely. He did not consider his earlier statement to be a request. He assumed it was something that would happen. "Are you sure you want to do it?" Valentina asked. "Of course, Mom." "Well, you know you have to start from the bottom and work your way up. Why, I can't give you special treatment. It wouldn't be fair to those. Life isn't fair, Mom. I've got dumb kids in my school going to Ivy League schools because that's where everyone in their family goes. That's life. You take care of your own, and the hell with everyone else. I've taken care of you, George. The first thing you can admit that you've taken good care of me," George said as he poured himself a glass of soda. "Perhaps I've protected you too much." "What are you talking about? You don't seem to think you have to work for anything. You got your job from Grandpa. What did you ever do?" Valentina cut of her son and glared at him as she replied, "I got into a good school without any legacy points. I was the youngest executive ever at the company I started with out of college. My father wouldn't even give me a job out of college. I had to earn one." "You think you can just walk in his company and start as a higher-up with no skills or knowledge? My friend Henry's father is bringing him on. He's teaching him what he needs to know." "Henry? Well, at least I know I won't have to be worrying about that company as a rival in the future." Oh, come on, Mom, no one can expect you to treat your kid like you would anybody else, maybe not. But I will. George glared at his mother and asked, okay, for the sake of argument, what's your starting position? Our entry position for a non-OLED graduate is a junior secretary, although some of the girls call her the office girl or the junior receptionist. George stared at his mother in silence before he said, you're joking. No, that's where you'll have to start if you don't want to go to college. Underscore secretary, don't you use that kind of language with me. Valentina admonished her son. You're kidding me. No, you can't expect me to be running around for your employees. What would they think of your son doing that they would know that except for the ones that know you? So you're going to hide the fact that I'm your son? Well, I own employee guides for those kinds of jobs. So yes, I'm going to hide the fact that you're anyone's son. George froze as he heard his mother's words. After a few seconds of silence, he asked, you seriously think I'm going to come to work for you as a girl? Well, no, you're not really a girl. You'll just be a guy who happens to look and act like a girl. You've lost your mind, George replied as he threw up his hands. It's that or nothing. Well, then, it's nothing. Then what are you going to do? Whatever, that's not a plan. I'll figure something out. You better. In fact, given the speed you generally move at, I better give you a deadline. You've got 3 weeks. You don't want to go school. Fine. Well, then you need to find a job. You've got 3 weeks to find one. If you don't have one, then you either move out or come to work for me, where a person with your education and skills starts. This is a underscore joke, right? No, and don't take that tone with me. Fine, I'll go get a job. I don't care what I have to do. But I'm not doing that. You need me, Mom. I'm the only family you got. You need someone to turn the business over to. I'm sure I can find plenty of capable people to run my business. When I'm gone, I love you, George, but you need me more than I need you. You just have to trust me that this is for the best. George threw up his hands and walked out of the room. George woke up and saw the alarm clock showing the time, 9:38 a.m. He clenched his eyes before he pushed himself out of bed. He grabbed hold of his head and tried not to think about what the day would bring. It was 3 weeks to the day from the day his mother gave him the ultimatum. All hopes that she would forget it were dashed as she made sure to give him daily reminders of it. George could only hope that her threat was hollow. George got to his feet and walked out of his bedroom in his wrinkled pajama, flannel bottoms, and white t-shirt. He walked down the steps and into the kitchen, where he saw his mother reading the newspaper with a cup of tea. So, how did the job search go this week? Valentina asked her son. George put his head down and said, same as last week. Valentina took a sip of her tea and asked, do you remember what I told you? Yes, George said, as he buried his chin into his chest. So, what's it going to be? Oh, come on, Mom, you can't expect me to do this. I'm not going to do any special favors. I've given you every opportunity in life, and each time you've wasted it, there are no more golden opportunities coming for me. Can I at least work as a man? No, I don't want any of my girls weirded out by some male secretary invading their comfort zones. Girls are different with each other than they are with men. Well, at least with straight men, Mom. There are plenty of male, not secretaries. What do they call them now? Administrative assistants, which is just a nice way of saying secretary when you're talking about a man doing the job. So are there guys doing it? Why can't I? Yes, but the men are largely, if not exclusively, gay. I have some homophobic older employees that might not take well to a gay secretary. Why? Amanda's secretary, Evelyn, she's almost 72, and she hates gays. I'm not gay. I know, sweetie, your grades and appearance clearly show that, but you'd have to at least act the part too. Really integrate yourself with the other members of my office's support staff. This is ridiculous. My house, my company, my rules. If you don't like it, there's the door, Valentina said, pointing to the front door of the home. Valentina smiled at her son. She had George right where she wanted him and was going to keep pressing her advantage. She had not guided her family's company to the top of a male-dominated industry by sitting back and being placid. Valentina knew full well that when she had an opportunity, she had to seize it. George's sulking face told her all she needed to know. Valentina had watched her son underachieve his whole life. He never took his schoolwork seriously and hung around with a group of friends that she considered delinquents and scum. Several of George's male friends had been arrested for vandalism and drug possession, and 2 of his female friends had been as well. She hated their lack of manners and the baggy clothing of the boys, as well as the underscore short plaid schoolgirl skirts with ripped stockings and goth-like combat boots his female friends tended to wear. Valentina felt her son's friends were a collection of freaks and deviants who were a bad influence on him. By the defeated look in her son's eyes, Valentina knew that she was about to get the wedge she needed to separate George from his friends. George glanced up at his mother and said in a low voice, I'll do it. Valentina smirked as she looked at her son while he stared down at the floor, unable to meet her gaze. Do what, dear? George sighed and said, I'll work for you. I'm glad you finally came around. What do I have to do? George asked as he nervously tugged on his shirt. Well, you have to start getting ready for your new job. You're going to start next Monday, but we have much to do to get you ready. Like what? George asked. Well, we have to give you makeover, and get you some new clothes for work and around the house. Around the house, George shrieked. Yes, you can't keep walking around here like that. You need to get into Gia's mind and become her. Gia, yes, that's your name. I don't get to pick my name. You didn't pick your name the last time around either, so don't feel too bad about it. Gia is the name I always save for my daughter, but I never had one. Don't you think that name will be confusing? Can't it be Georgia or Georgina or something? That's not that different from my name. No, we need to reinforce that there's a clear distinction from George and the girl you're going to be. I think Gia helps create the separation you're going to need from your old life. Old life. I don't want a George, dear. You have to become the girl you're going to be in body and mind. You have to be her. It's like method acting. You need to live the part. You can't go home and be yourself. You have to stay in the right frame of my mind. We can't afford any slip-ups. At work, I don't want anybody thinking that you're some underscore or a underscore. Boy, I want them to look at you and say that Gia is just like any other girl. George froze up as he heard his mother's words and realized what he had agreed to. As much as he wanted to run, he knew he had no better opportunity outside the front door of his mother's home. As a slight man standing only 57 and 140 pounds, George did not have much strength to compete with the other people living on the streets. He also knew he had been too coddled in life to make it on his own. George felt like crying as he realized that he was trapped. He knew that his mother could do whatever she wanted with him, and he would have little ability to refuse to go along with it. Valentina looked over her stunned son and said, well, let's get started then. Now, George asked, breaking his stupor. No time like the present, dear. George nodded and said, what do you want me to do? Well, first go upstairs and get into the shower and get rid of all that nasty boy hair beneath your head. When you're done, shave your beard. You look so much better when you don't have that George Michael stubble. Who's George Michael? He's the singer you were named after. I had a thing for him in the 80s before I realized that he was so. Dad told me I was named after his father. Oh, that's what I told him. So he would go along with name. Now go get rid of all that ugly hair. Mom, I don't think it'll make a difference. No one is going to believe that I'm a girl. You've got to have faith. Don't quote Limp Bizkit songs. They suck. Wow. See that, son? What you've only agreed to become GF 5 minutes ago. And we already found something we can agree on for the first time in 5 years. George smiled for a moment before he plodded up the stairs. He walked into the bathroom and disrobed. He stepped into the shower and washed his body before he picked up his mother's razor and shaving foam. George lathered his legs up and began to remove his body hair. Each time George placed the blades on his skin, he felt more and more emasculated about what he was doing. George cursed himself for putting himself in the position he was in. He wanted to scream out how wrong he felt at that moment, but he knew it would not do him any good. George finished with his legs and removed the hair from his chest and forearms next before moving on to his armpits. Once George was done shaving his body, he shut off the water. He grabbed a towel and smelled the strawberry scent of the shaving foam on his newly smooth body. He groaned at the feminine of his scent as he dried himself off before he began to shave his face. George shaved off all of his facial hair before he redressed in his pajamas and went to find his mother. Valentina smiled as she saw her son's hairless forearms as he walked towards her. Well, you look better already. You even smell better, Valentina said with a smile. George rolled his eyes and said, let's get the rest of this hell over with as you wish, dear. Come along. George followed Valentina up to the master bathroom and saw the strips laid out on her sink top. George knew what they were for and cringed at the thought of having his eyebrows waxed. Valentina told him to take a seat on the toilet as she prepared the wax for him. She put the wax and strands over his eyes and pulled them away. George let out a yelp that prompted Valentina to smirk before she said, we're almost done. I just have to tweeze out the little leftovers. George prepared for more pain, but he found the tweezing to be near painless. Valentina finished and told George to get dressed in the clothing she had left for him on her bed. George hesitantly walked over to the clothing. George picked up the new pair of black panties and saw the matching bra, one of his mother's around the house t-shirts, a pair of her sweatpants, and his Adidas sandals. George looked at the collection of clothing on his mother's bed as Valentina came out of the bathroom. She glared at George and said, go get changed. What are you waiting for? This isn't what I expected. George said, good, because you'll only be wearing those once, well, maybe twice. Those clothes go with the backstory I came up with for you for the girls at the shop. I told my stylist Dominique to tell everyone you're my tomboy niece who's come to work for me. Does Dominique know how I really am? Of course, but she's a born liar, so she can keep a secret about who you really are. George nodded and carried the clothing into his mother's bathroom. He disrobed and put each article of clothing on and came out for his mother to inspect him. Valentina smirked as she looked him over before she grabbed 2 pairs of socks and Stuffed one pair into each of his bra cups. Valentina nodded as she took a step away from to take in his appearance. She then smiled and said, "That will do just fine." George put his head down before his mother said, "Now, let's just put the finishing touches on you, and we'll be ready to go." George nodded as Valentina took his hand and brought him back into her bathroom. Valentina sat George down again on the toilet bowl and began applying eyeliner, lipstick, and mascara to his face. George felt like a fool, as his mother gave him a makeover, but he felt as if he had no other options.